Sex is incredibly important to our society. Since we believe it is so important, we create a lot of rules and norms that people should follow or otherwise be seen as deviant. Many believe that sexuality is biological or something you are born with. This is the theory of sexual essentialism. One counterargument to this essentialist theory is the social constructionist theory of sexuality, which argues that our social categories come from society. From this theory, we will argue that sexuality is socially constructed and reinforced by social structures, giving privilege to some and disempowering others. Since society changes over time, we can observe, when looking at the history of sexuality, that the way we conceptualize sexuality has changed over time as well. One example of this change can be seen in how our society thinks about homosexuality. Same-sex sex acts were previously viewed as a sinful act that anyone could commit and be forgiven for. Over time, the term homosexuality was created and associated with mental illness, until the term was adopted by people with same-sex desires as a way to label themselves. This shift to using homosexuality to define one's identity was an attempt to validate same-sex desires while also using a term that already existed in society. However, this attempt has not removed the oppression linked with the term homosexual, thus still reinforces its status as something bad in our society. This construction of bad sex versus good sex is described by Rubin's charmed circle. It is based on the idea we hold as a society that sex is both sacred and profane. The sex within the inner circle is privilege, while sex outside of the circle is stigmatized. The sex inside the inner circle can be defined as heteronormative sex. Heteronormativity is a norm in our society that reinforces the idea that everyone should be or is heterosexual. Heteronormativity also creates norms around gender expression that intersects with heterosexuality. The idea that men and women are opposites that attract one another socially constructs a gender binary based on this oppositeness. Seeing women and men as opposites makes every action or trait expected to be opposite between them. This is called the sexual double standard, and it is reinforced by the social structure of gender. The sexual double standard sets the expectation that men should always want to have sex, and that women are the gatekeepers of sexuality and do not desire sex themselves. This creates a problem for both men and women. One example of this sexual double standard is in the way that women are acceptably allowed to pursue their same-sex desires. It is socially acceptable for women to participate in same-sex sexual activities like kissing at parties or threesomes. But the catch is that these activities must include a man or be performed for men. Having men involved moves these sexual interactions from being seen as profane when between two women to being socially acceptable because it is for the pleasure of men. This is socially acceptable because the sexual double standard sets the norm that women do not have sexual desires. Thus, the sexual acts between women are not seen as real sex, so it must be for the pleasure of men. One of the most important social structures in a person's life is family. We can see through the historical shift in family function an effect on sexuality of those within our society. The shift from an agriculturally based society to a capitalist society caused a shift away from reliance on a family unit for one's needs. This is because in an agricultural society, family units produced all goods needed for survival themselves. In a capitalist society, one family unit did not need to produce all the required resources. They could purchase them instead. Once able to survive apart from a family unit, desires that were not heteronormative were allowed to be explored. Those that deviate from their heteronormative family may be kicked out, but likely could provide for themselves in a capitalist society and would not starve to death, for example. As a result, non-heteronormative communities began to emerge during this time, which was not seen in agricultural times.
Another social structure that reinforces sexuality in our society is the media. A specific example of media representing heteronormativity can be seen in children's movies. Children's movies showcase heteronormative relationships as the most important and magical relationships in a person's life. Without any other options, these movies reinforce that all people are or should be heterosexual. However, the heterosexual relationships shown are a very specific form of heterosexuality that is concurrent with the privileged sex in Rubin's charmed inner circle. Other forms of relationships, such as queer relationships, are not shown, often because they are believed to be too profane to show to children. This limits the types of relationships children are exposed to, preventing them from pursuing desires that do not correlate with the heteronormative roles they are told they need to play. As we have shown, social structures such as gender, family, and media representation reinforce these sexual categories created by society. This privileges those that conform to the normative ideas around sex, while stigmatizing those that do not conform. The more we break down these norms around sexuality and see them as socially constructed rather than natural, the better we will be able to tackle issues around inequality in our society.